There was something poetic about drifting through space with no particular destination, a bit like a leaf swirling down a drain. Except instead of peaceful stream, it was more like a black hole ready to swallow you whole. Captain Arlen Mirov sat in the command chair of the Last Hope, a name that smacked of optimism and desperation in equal measure, watching the void through the viewport. "Gotta love the smell of cosmic fumes in the morning," he muttered, not that there was much to smell in the recycled air of a starship. The refugee fleet, a ragtag collection of vessels that looked less like a formidable armada and more like a scrapyard's wet dream, was limping through the most inhospitable sector of space known as the Gauntlet. It wasn't named for its hospitality. Just the kind of scenic route that keeps you on your toes and your bowels loose. "Captain, incoming transmission," barked Lieutenant Harv, a man whose voice could strip varnish off a hull. "It's from Earth." Mirov looked up, eyebrows arching like the trajectory of a poorly aimed torpedo. "Put it through, Harv. Let's see what fresh hell awaits us." The holographic screen flickered to life, displaying the visage of an Earth diplomat whose expression was somewhere between constipation and panic. "Captain Mirov, we've received intelligence about a new threat. A superweapon is being aimed directly at Earth. The Council needs your fleet to intercept it." "Of course they do," Mirov replied, his voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that could peel paint. "Because there's no one else left to save their sorry asses. What do they expect us to do, throw legal briefs at it?" The diplomat's image wavered, as if considering whether it was worth the effort to respond to such insolence. "We trust in your capabilities, Captain," he finally said, diplomatically sidestepping Mirov's cynicism the way a man might sidestep a puddle of vomit. "You'll be the last line of defense, more like the last line of offense," Mirov muttered after the transmission ended, rubbing his temples. "Harv, get Juno on the line. We might need her legal wizardry more than ever now." Junoka, the fleet's so-called legal eagle, was a woman with a tongue sharper than any blade, and the patience of a saint who'd quit sainthood for a more profitable line of work. She appeared on the screen with a look that said she was 5 cups of coffee deep into a day that had started poorly and only gotten worse. "Captain," she said, voice carrying the dry crackle of wit. "What legal catastrophe are we embroiled in this time?" "The usual," Mirov said with a sigh. "Galactic doom, superweapon aimed at Earth, and we're stuck playing the galaxy's worst defense attorney. Think you can draft up a lawsuit against whoever thought aiming a death ray at our home planet was a good idea?" Juno smirked. "A slow, dangerous thing. I could sue an asteroid for existing too aggressively if it came to it. But this sounds like something a little less frivolous." "Less frivolous and more suicidal," Mirov corrected. "Can you make it stick?" "Captain, I can make chewing gum stick on the tail end of a comet. Just give me something to work with." "You heard the lady, Harv," Mirov said, leaning back and glancing around the bridge. "Find out who built this superweapon and if we can send them a cease and desist. Right away, Captain, because those always work," Harv grumbled, his fingers dancing over the console. Mirov turned his attention back to Juno. "We might be the last hope for Earth, but let's face it, we've always been more of a last resort type of outfit." Juno chuckled, a sound that could slice through the tension like a hot knife through butter. "Isn't that what we do best?" The fleet continued its sluggish crawl through the gauntlet, every creak and groan of the ships a testament to their dilapidated state. Each vessel in the fleet was an amalgamation of stolen technology and second-hand parts that somehow managed to hold together, akin to a cosmic Frankenstein's monster. The comms crackled to life again, this time a voice that oozed confidence like a politician in an election year. "This is Admiral Chiron of the Unified Alliance," the voice announced, all pomp and no circumstance. "We've received your situation report. Reinforcements are on the way." "Reinforcements," Mirov repeated, feigning incredulity. Did someone finally grow a spine back home, or are they just hoping to pawn off the blame when we fail? Chiron's voice carried a hint of irritation. "Captain, this is a serious situation. So's my breakfast when the toaster goes haywire," Mirov shot back, not missing a beat. "Juno, you getting all this?" "Loud and clear," Juno replied, her voice smooth like a well-practiced lawyer's smile. "Admiral Chiron, should I prepare a legal briefing for when your reinforcements inevitably blow something up they weren't supposed to?" There was a pause on the line, the kind that could be measured in the anxious tapping of fingers and the grinding of teeth. "Just ensure the fleet is ready, Captain," Chiron responded, clearly deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. Mirov cut the transmission with a flick of his wrist, shaking his head. "Admirals and their reinforcements. They're probably cannon fodder," Harv suggested, only half joking. "Probably," Mirov agreed, turning his gaze back to the expanse of stars outside. "But until they get here, we're the only thing standing between that superweapon and a crater where Earth used to be. And we're supposed to do what exactly?" Harv asked, gesturing at the motley assortment of ships that made up their fleet. "Give them a stern talking to." "Maybe," Mirov said, eyes narrowing. Or we could see how much legal trouble Juno can stir up in the meantime. Oh, I can stir up a lot, Juno promised, a mischievous gleam in her eyes. Just give me a target. Let's start with whoever's behind that superweapon, Mirov said, and if that doesn't work, we'll just have to improvise. Improvise, Harv repeated, looking like someone who'd just been told to defuse a bomb with a butter knife. Sure, why not? Mirov grinned, a wolfish expression. Welcome to the fleet, Harv. Improvise is what we do best. As the fleet trudged onward, the looming threat of a galactic superweapon cast a long shadow over their path. It was the sort of menace that made a person appreciate the little things in life, like the ability to breathe without an impending sense of doom. You know, Juno said, her voice cutting through the silence like a hot knife through tension. If we survive this, I might just retire. Mirov snorted. Retire? What would you do with all that free time? Spend it suing the universe for emotional distress, Juno replied with a smirk. Sounds like a plan, Mirov said, leaning back in his chair as the stars streaked past, the weight of their impossible task pressing down with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. And if the reinforcements don't arrive, Harv asked, his voice betraying the slightest hint of apprehension. Then we do what we always do, Mirov said, his eyes fixed on the void. We wing it and hope we don't end up as space dust. Great, Harv muttered. Nothing like a little optimism to start the day. With that, the last hope and its beleaguered fleet continued their perilous journey, caught between the hammer of a superweapon and the anvil of ineptitude. Somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of endless night, their fate awaited. Maybe it would be doom, maybe salvation, but one thing was certain, it would be one hell of a legal battle. Captain Arlen Mirov surveyed the bridge of the last hope, trying to ignore the growing tension that felt like a live wire sparking in the air. It was the kind of day that made you wish for a strong drink and a stronger stomach. The refugee fleet was low on everything, food, fuel, morale. Hell, they were even out of decent jokes. Floating through the gauntlet had all the charm of a dentist's office if the dentist were a sadist with a penchant for rusty tools. We're running out of air fresheners, Captain, Harv grumbled, his voice a rasp that could sand wood. And the cough is gone. Again. Tragic, Mirov replied, rolling his eyes. A real catastrophe. Maybe we should call Earth and tell them they're doomed because we can't get our caffeine fix. Lieutenant Harv snorted, a sound like a broken engine struggling to turn over. Might just convince them to surrender outright. Mirov leaned back, surveying the ragtag fleet on the holographic display. We're supposed to be intercepting a superweapon, and we're reduced to bitching about coffee. Priorities, Harv. If the weapon doesn't kill us, the lack of caffeine will, Harv shot back. Mirov chuckled, but it was the dry kind that didn't reach his eyes. Now that's a headline. Heroic fleet defeated by coffee shortage. Before Harv could retort, the comms crackled to life again. This time it was Junoka. Her image flickered onto the console, and she looked exactly like someone who'd just discovered her cat had peed on her favorite shoes. Captain, she began, her voice carrying the urgency of a tax audit. We've got a situation, a big one. Of course we do, Mirov sighed. Can't ever have a boring day, can we? Juno didn't even crack a smile. The superweapon. It's malfunctioned. Malfunctioned how? Mirov asked, his interest piqued despite himself. Juno took a deep breath, the kind that usually preceded bad news or a coughing fit. It's pointed at Earth, sure, but the targeting system's fried. It's on a timer, and when it goes off, it's going to hit, well, everywhere. Harv let out a low whistle. Everywhere, Captain. That's a lot of lawsuits. Mirov ran a hand through his hair, feeling the beginnings of a tension headache. So Earth gets obliterated by a drunk superweapon. Fantastic. Any chance we can fix it? Fix it, Juno repeated, eyebrows raised. I'm not a miracle worker, Captain. I'm more of a sue them for their lunch money kind of gal. Right, Mirov said, rubbing his temples, so we can't stop it. Can we at least redirect it? That's going to require some serious hacking, Juno replied, and we're low on resources. Of course we are, Mirov muttered. When aren't we? The bridge crew looked to him, expectant. It was the kind of pressure you didn't sign up for. All right, people, let's put our heads together and pretend we're smarter than we are. Juno, find a way to hack that thing. Harv, see if we can scrounge up any tech that might help. Aye, Captain, Harv said, already barking orders into the comms like a drill sergeant with a hangover. Juno's voice came crackling through again, a beacon of irony piercing the gloom. You know, if this fleet were a courtroom, we'd be held in contempt by now. Harv, make sure Juno has everything she needs, Mirov said, ignoring the sarcasm. If that means pulling wires out of my chair, do it. You got it, Captain, though you might have to stand for the rest of the trip, Harv replied with a toothy grin. Mirov waved him off. Wouldn't be the worst thing to happen today. The rest of the day was a blur of frantic activity. Mirov moved from station to station, barking orders, checking systems, trying to keep a lid on the bubbling pot of anxiety that was his crew. The fleet was held together with duct tape and dreams, and both were running thin. Captain, Harv called, waving him over. We've got a lead on a possible solution. Mirov ambled over, trying to feign the enthusiasm he wasn't feeling. Lay it on me, Harv. We found an old relay station, Harv explained. It's derelict but close enough to the superweapon to act as a bridge. If Juno can hack the relay, we might just be able to override the weapon's targeting. And if it fails, Mirov asked, knowing the answer wouldn't be pretty, then we become the universe's most ambitious fireworks display, Harv said with a grim smile. Fantastic. Always wanted to go out with a bang, Mirov replied, clapping Harv on the shoulder. Get us there? Aye, Captain, Harv nodded, his hands a blur over the console. Mirov returned to his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. He tapped the comm link to Juno. You hear that, Juno? Loud and clear, she replied. I'll start prepping the legal briefs for when this goes sideways. Always the optimist, Mirov said. You know me, Juno replied, her voice a bomb of sarcasm. Always planning for the worst, the fleet limped onward, every creak and groan a testament to its patchwork existence. The relay station loomed ahead, a sprawling mass of metal and defunct technology, like a junkyard that had taken up residence in space. I hope that thing hasn't completely rusted over, Harv muttered as they approached. I hope it explodes spectacularly, Mirov replied. At least it'd be entertaining. Setting course, Captain, Harv said, steering the last hope toward the station. Juno's voice cut in again, sharp and clear. Captain, if we pull this off, I'm billing the universe for overtime. Mirov's grin was a tight, humorless thing. Bill him double, we're worth it. The last hope docked with the relay station, the hull scraping ominously as if in protest. Mirov led the way, Harv trailing close behind. The air inside was stale and metallic, the kind of atmosphere that suggested ghosts and forgotten dreams. Welcome to the heart of nowhere, Harv quipped, kicking at a loose panel that clattered to the floor. Charming, Mirov muttered, scanning the dimly lit corridors. Let's find that control room before this whole place decides to fall apart. They navigated through the labyrinthine structure, the silence punctuated by the occasional creak of metal. It was a place that felt abandoned by time itself, left to rust in the cold embrace of space. Captain, Harv said, pointing to a door marked with faded lettering. This looks promising. Mirov opened the door, revealing a control room that had seen better centuries. Dust clung to every surface and the screens flickered with static. Juno, we're in, he said into the comlink. Hope you're ready to perform miracles. Miracles on demand, Juno replied, her voice carrying the wry amusement of someone who had long given up believing in them. Plug me in, Captain. Harv connected Juno's link to the console, and her holographic avatar flickered into existence. Let's see what kind of mess we're working with, she said, diving into the archaic system with the enthusiasm of a tax auditor on bonus day. Mirov watched as she worked, her fingers dancing over the holographic interface like a conductor leading a symphony of chaos. How's it looking? He asked. Like someone tried to rewrite the laws of physics using a sledgehammer, Juno replied, her focus razor-sharp. But give me a few minutes and we might stand a chance. See, Harv, Mirov said with a grin, we might not be doomed after all. Harv snorted, crossing his arms. I wouldn't bet my last meal ration on it. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the tension thick enough to cut with a dull spoon. Finally, Juno let out a triumphant cry. I've got it, the relay's responding. About time, Harv muttered, visibly relaxing. Mirov clapped his hands together. All right then. Let's redirect that damned weapon and save Earth from becoming cosmic toast. Juno's fingers moved like lightning, bypassing corrupt data and patching systems together with sheer stubbornness. Rerouting now, she said, her voice a balm to frayed nerves. The control room's screens flickered, and one by one they came to life, displaying the schematics of the superweapon. Mirov let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Now let's make sure it doesn't aim anywhere populated. Trying, Juno replied, sweat beading on her holographic brow. It's like herding cats armed with lasers. Mirov glanced at Harv. If we survive this, you're buying the drinks. Deal, Harv said with a grin. The relay hummed and Juno worked her magic. Finally, she exhaled, leaning back as the console chirped in compliance. Rerouted. The weapon's now aimed at a desolate asteroid belt. Perfect, Mirov said, relief washing over him. That'll give the rocks something to complain about. Juno wiped her brow, her relief palpable even over the HoloLink. Captain, if this works, I'm taking a long vacation, on a beach, with no comms. Mirov chuckled, the sound more genuine this time. You've earned it. Assuming we don't get blown up before then. Always the pessimist, Harv chided, checking the console readouts. Looks like we're in the clear, Captain. Mirov nodded, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. Good work, everyone. Now let's get back to the fleet and pray the reinforcements actually show up. Juno's holographic form flickered, her expression mock serious. And if they don't, we can always sue them for dereliction of duty. Right, Mirov said, a sardonic grin spreading across his face. Just another day in paradise. The last hope undocked from the relay station, the fleet once again on the move. The threat of the superweapon had been averted for now. But in the grim expanse of space, Mirov knew one truth held steady. There was always another disaster waiting around the corner, and they'd be ready for it, with sarcasm as their shield and gallows humor as their sword. And Captain, Juno added, next time Earth wants defending, let's negotiate a better coffee supply. Agreed, Mirov said, steering the ship back into the starry void. Wouldn't want to face the end of the world uncaffeinated, after all. Interstellar Court, Juno muttered, glaring at the flickering holographic screen. The only place where justice is served lukewarm, if at all. Captain Arlen Mirov stood beside her, arms crossed, looking like a man whose patience had been tried one too many times. Remind me why we're trusting our fate to a bunch of bureaucrats who couldn't find their own asses with both hands and a map. Because, Captain, Juno replied with mock seriousness, it's the only game in town and our chips are already down. The holographic courtroom was a patchwork of representatives from across the galaxy. A menagerie of voices arguing over the fate of Earth like it was the last drumstick at a family dinner. Some of them looked like they hadn't seen sunlight in years, which, given the nature of space travel, wasn't entirely unlikely. Lieutenant Harv chimed in from his station, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Cheer up, Captain. At least if they screw this up, we won't be around to witness the aftermath. Comforting, Mirov grunted, eyes on the screen as the Earth diplomat made his plea. The poor man looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, perhaps sipping a drink with a tiny umbrella on some far-off beach planet, instead of trying to convince a roomful of skeptics not to let Earth become a spectacular fireworks show. Juno leaned closer to the mic, adjusting her headset. Ladies and gentlemen of the court, she began, her tone a mix of formality and exasperation. I present evidence that the superweapon aimed at Earth has sustained a critical malfunction. It's only by sheer luck, or lack thereof, that it hasn't already turned Earth into space confetti. One of the representatives, a particularly grizzled-looking fellow with a voice like gravel mixed with disdain, interrupted. And why should we believe you? How do we know this isn't some elaborate Earth plot to gain sympathy? Juno's smile was acidic. If I wanted sympathy, I'd write a sob story, not present hard evidence. Hell, I might even cry a little for effect, but I'm fresh out of tears. The courtroom murmured, unsure whether to laugh or scowl. Mirov could almost hear their collective discomfort. Another representative, this one sporting a patch over one eye that added absolutely nothing to his credibility, chimed in. Perhaps the weapon should be allowed to fire. It would certainly solve some overpopulation issues. Great, Harv muttered under his breath. Let's solve overpopulation with a universal massacre. That's new. Juno wasn't having it. Sure, let's just let the weapon go off. After all, solving problems with excessive violence has always worked out so well in history, she shot back, her sarcasm cutting through the air like a blade. Mirov shook his head. Idiots, we should have just let the thing shoot and watched them try to explain that one away. The representatives were divided, their holographic images flickering as if the technology itself was embarrassed to be associated with them. The debate raged on, with some arguing for the weapon's disarmament and others advocating for its use, citing everything from strategic advantage to cosmic Darwinism. The Earth diplomat, looking more and more like a man in the throes of a midlife crisis, tried valiantly to regain control. Esteemed members of the court, he began, voice faltering like a cat caught in a rainstorm. Surely the threat of mutual destruction is not the solution we seek. Mutual destruction, Harv echoed, incredulous, more like unilateral annihilation. Juno sighed, her fingers tapping impatiently on the console. This isn't going anywhere, Captain. They're arguing about our lives like we're figures on a chessboard, Mirov grunted. Figures on a chessboard would at least get a decent funeral. As the debate continued, the tension on the last hope was thicker than the recycled air they were breathing. Harv was pacing now, his impatience a tangible thing. Why do we always end up in these situations where we're at the mercy of people who couldn't care less whether we live or die? Because Harv, Juno replied, voice dripping with irony, the universe has a sense of humor, and apparently we're the punchline. Mirov eyed the screen, his gaze hard. We need a plan B. Maybe a plan C, D, and E while we're at it, considering our luck. Juno nodded, her expression one of grim determination. I'm already working on it, Captain, but if this court doesn't come to a decision soon, we might have to take matters into our own hands. Harv stopped pacing, looking at Mirov with a mix of hope and exasperation. You mean like we always do? Exactly, Mirov replied, his voice steady. Because when the galaxy gives you lemons, you make sure they're weaponized. Back in the courtroom, the discussion showed no signs of resolving. The representatives were like dogs with a bone, unwilling to let go of their arguments even if their lives depended on it, which they did, though they seemed blissfully unaware. One representative, a woman with a voice like silk wrapped in steel, finally spoke up. If we allow the weapon to fire, We risk awakening political tensions that have long lain dormant. Are we truly willing to gamble on destruction when the stakes are this high? Her words seemed to penetrate the thick skulls of a few of her colleagues, and there was a shift in the room's energy. Mirov could almost feel it through the screen, a sliver of hope cutting through the despair. But then the grizzled representative from earlier snorted, his derision palpable. And what do you propose? Wait until Earth petitions us with more sob stories of impending doom. Juno rolled her eyes, speaking into the mic before Mirov could stop her. Petitioning would imply we expect you to do something about it. We're just hoping you don't make things worse. Mirov chuckled despite himself, shaking his head. You're gonna get us all in trouble. Trouble? Juno replied with a smirk. Captain, I live for it. The debate dragged on, the holo images of the representatives flickering as if they were as tired of the discussion as everyone else. The Earth diplomat, looking like he was one bad argument away from a complete breakdown, tried to rally once more. Ladies and gentlemen, I implore you, the fate of billions hangs in the balance. Yes, Harv muttered, and if they fall, it's our necks on the line. Mirov nodded, his resolve hardening. If they don't come through, we'll have to rely on good old-fashioned ingenuity. And when that fails, Harv asked, though the answer was obvious. Explosions, Mirov replied with a grim smile. Lots of them. The courtroom finally seemed to reach a conclusion, though it was as half-baked as the arguments that had preceded it. An agreement was tentatively reached to investigate the malfunction and attempt to disarm the weapon, though not without significant opposition. Juno leaned back, rubbing her temples. Well, it's not a victory, but it's a start. It's more than I expected, Mirov admitted, though he wasn't about to let hope blind him to reality. Same, Harv added, his sarcastic demeanor slipping just a bit. Guess we live to fight another day. Mirov turned away from the screen, focusing on the task at hand, keeping his ship and crew together long enough to see this mess through. All right, people, we might not be out of the woods yet, but we're not dead either. Let's get back to the fleet. Juno nodded, her fingers flying over the console as she prepared to disengage from the court's network. I'll keep monitoring the situation. If they try to pull a fast one, we'll be the first to know. Mirov smiled, genuinely this time. Good, now let's see if we can get through today without another existential crisis. Not likely, Harv quipped, but there was a hint of laughter in his voice. As the last hope drifted away from the courtroom signal, Mirov allowed himself a moment to breathe. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for now they'd managed to buy themselves some time. And in a universe as vast and uncaring as the one they lived in, time was the most precious commodity of all. Earth might not thank us, Juno said, breaking the silence, but at least it'll still be there to ignore us, which is all anyone can ask for, Mirov replied. Let's head back. I suddenly have a craving for stale coffee and old rations, because nothing says celebration like recycled food and caffeine, Harv agreed, settling back into his station with a grin. As the last hope rejoined the fleet, Mirov couldn't help but feel a pang of satisfaction. They'd managed to stave off disaster for the moment, and if that wasn't worth a small victory lap, he didn't know what was. Captain, Juno said, her voice softening as they set course. Thanks for trusting me in there. Mirov nodded, his expression sincere. Someday you'll have to explain how you managed to pull these miracles off. Simple, Juno replied with a wink. I improvise. Works for me, Harv said, leaning back in his chair as if daring the universe to throw its next curveball. And as the last hope sailed through the void, Mirov couldn't help but agree. In a galaxy full of uncertainties, they had each other, their wits, and a healthy dose of sarcasm to see them through. And sometimes that was enough. Captain Arlen Mirov reclined in his chair on the bridge of the Last Hope, staring at the holographic screen which had just disconnected from the interstellar court. He sighed, a sound akin to the air escaping from a deflating balloon. Well, that was a dumpster fire of epic proportions. Lieutenant Harv, his second-in-command and perpetual bearer of sarcastic quips, leaned against the console with a mock solemnity. It almost makes you nostalgic for the days when the biggest problem was deciding which part of the ship to jettison first. Remember the time we had to share spacesuits because of a laundry mix-up? Junoka, their ever-watchful communicator, chimed in, her voice crackling through the intercom. Those were the good old days. Mirov shook his head. Yeah, sharing sweaty spacesuits was practically a vacation compared to this bureaucratic cesspit. As the bridge crew settled back into their routine of pretending to work, Harv glanced over at Mirov. What's the next move, Captain? Or are we just gonna sit here and wait for these galactic geniuses to implode? Much as I'd love to sit back and watch the fireworks, we've got bigger problems, Mirov said, his face darkening like a storm cloud. There's been sabotage within the fleet. Juno's voice came over the intercom, her tone sharpening. Sabotage. What did they do? Swap out our coffee ration with rat poison? Cause I wouldn't be surprised. Worse, Mirov replied. Someone's been tampering with the navigation systems. If we don't fix it, we're going to turn the gauntlet into a one-way trip to oblivion. Just when you thought the universe couldn't screw us harder, Harv remarked, a humorless grin etched on his face. Right, Juno said. Because navigating the gauntlet wasn't already like threading a needle while blindfolded and drunk. Mirov nodded. And that's not all. We've got a new hail from the Earth diplomat, insisting on another session with the court. Apparently he's discovered some hidden clause in the interstellar law that might save our sorry asses. Harv rolled his eyes. A hidden clause. Let me guess it's buried under a mountain of red tape and requires a secret handshake to unlock. Pretty much, Mirov confirmed. Apparently it hinges on obtaining some critical evidence. If we can secure it, we might force the court's hand. And where exactly is this evidence? Juno asked, her voice loaded with suspicion. Mirov's eyes met Harv's, the weight of his next words heavy as gravity. It's located in the heart of the gauntlet. Harv let out a low whistle. Of course it is, because why wouldn't it be in the most inhospitable place possible? Sounds like a suicide mission, Juno muttered, but her voice was charged with a thread of interest. Not that we haven't done that before. Exactly, Mirov said, nodding. The universe loves nothing more than watching us dance on a knife's edge. In the dimly lit bridge, they all shared a moment of silence, the reality of their predicament settling in like a cold, unwelcome guest. Then Harv clapped his hands together, the sound echoing off the metal walls. So who's in the mood for little light treason? I'm in, Juno said almost immediately. I mean, what else have I got to do? Knit sweaters from recycled air filters. Mirov grinned despite himself. All right, let's brief the crew. We either come back heroes or we don't come back at all. As the last hope prepared for their journey deeper into the gauntlet, the ship buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't optimism. It was more like gallows humor with a side of desperate hope. Down in the engine room, the crew was already hard at work. The clanging of tools and the hum of machinery underscored the tense atmosphere. Mirov stood at the edge, addressing his team with the tough love they were used to. Listen up, people, he began, his voice cutting through the noise. We've got a job to do and it's not going to be pretty. But then again, when is it ever? One of the engineers, a wiry man with arms like hydraulic pistons, looked up from his work. You mean we're not just here for the complimentary drinks and stunning views? The crew chuckled, the tension easing slightly. Mirov nodded. Exactly. As much as I'd love to sit back and enjoy a pina colada while watching two suns set, we've got to navigate the nastiest part of space to grab ourselves a legal loophole. Sounds like a hell of a vacation, another crew member quipped. Mirov smirked. Yeah, and the guided tour comes with free radiation exposure. As the crew prepared the ship for the perilous journey, Harv joined Mirov, handing him a datapad. Here's the latest diagnostics on the nav systems. Looks like the saboteur might have left a trail. Mirov eyed the data, his expression hardening. Good, it's about time we had something to go on. Juno walked in, her eyes sharp. I've been scanning the comms channels. If anyone's coordinating this sabotage, they're either very good or very stupid. Harv snorted. Or both. You'd be amazed how often those two go hand in hand. Let's just hope they slip up, Mirov said. In the meantime, we head into the belly of the beast. The last hope departed the relative safety of the fleet, plunging into the tangled mess of gravitational anomalies, asteroids, and space debris that made up the gauntlet. It was a place where the universe seemed to actively resent your existence. Harv sat at his station, fingers flying over the controls. I always wanted to see the inside of a blender from the food's perspective. Congratulations, Juno replied. You're living the dream. Mirov kept his focus on their path, calculating trajectories and cursing whoever had decided that the gauntlet was a good idea. If anything looks like it wants to kill us, assume it's not a coincidence. They maneuvered through the chaos, the ship groaning under the strain. The engines whined like a petulant child, and the hull occasionally rattled as if trying to shake off an itch. Juno's voice came over the intercom, an edge of tension creeping in. Captain, I'm picking up an anomaly in the data stream. Something's not right. Define not right, Mirov said, his eyes narrowing. Like a turbolift going sideways, Juno replied. It's like someone's trying to remote pilot the ship. Great, Harv muttered. As if the gauntlet wasn't enough, now we have ghosts in the machine. Mirov clenched his jaw. Can you isolate it? I'm on it, Juno said. But it's like wrestling a greased eel. Figures, Mirov grumbled. Harv, get down to engineering. I want eyes on every system. And someone find out who's been messing with our tech. Harv nodded, rising from his chair. On it. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, assume I got lost in an air vent. Or eaten by space gremlins, Juno added, unable to resist. Space gremlins or not, we need this fixed, Mirov said, his tone leaving no room for argument. As Harv disappeared into the bowels of the ship, Mirov and Juno continued to wrestle with the controls, each more stubborn than the last. It was a delicate dance, a battle of wills between human and machine. A few tense minutes later, Harv's voice crackled over the intercom. Captain, we found the problem. Someone's jury-rigged the system to feed false data. We can fix it, but it'll take some time. Time's a luxury we don't have, Mirov replied. Get it done as fast as you can. We're in the middle of cosmic minefield here. Working on it, Harv said, the sound of clanging metal punctuating his words. Juno, any luck on your end? Mirov asked, his eyes scanning the displays for any sign of impending doom. Just about, Juno said, her fingers a blur over the console. I've managed to lock out most of the interference, but whoever did this knew their stuff. Fantastic, Mirov said, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. Just what we need, a rogue tech genius with a vendetta. Don't worry, Juno said, a dangerous smile in her voice. We'll send him a thank you note. With a few explosive attachments. Make sure it's the kind that really says, we appreciate your efforts, Mirov replied, finally allowing himself a grim smile. The ship lurched as they passed through a particularly dense patch of space debris, the hull shuddering like a shaken snow globe. Mirov's grip on the controls tightened, his knuckles white. Keep her steady, he muttered, as much to himself as to Juno. We've come too far to let some tin-plated tinkerer send us spinning into oblivion. Finally, the ship emerged from the worst of the chaos, the path ahead clearing like the eye of a storm. Harv's voice came back over the intercom, slightly breathless but triumphant. Captain, we've stabilized the system. Should be smooth sailing from here. Good work, Mirov said, relief evident in his tone. Now let's finish this mission before something else decides to go wrong. The last hope pressed on, determination driving them forward. As they neared the coordinates for the critical evidence, the tension in the ship was a living thing, a coiled spring ready to snap. This better be worth it, Juno said, her voice a low murmur. It will be, Mirov assured her, though he couldn't say whether he was convincing her or himself. As they approached the designated location, Mirov felt the weight of their mission settle heavily on his shoulders. The stakes were astronomical, lives hanging in the balance. All right, people, he said, his voice steady. Let's do this. We've got a loophole to exploit and a universe to outsmart. They moved with a grim determination, knowing full well that failure wasn't an option. In the vastness of space, where hope was a scarce commodity and luck even scarcer, Captain Mirov and his crew did what they did best. They fought back with every ounce of cunning and stubbornness they had, because in the end, that's all they could do. The last hope moved like a drunken ballerina through the gauntlet, each twist and turn another chance a spectacularly messy end. Captain Arlen Mirov stood on the bridge, surveying the chaos, as the ship groaned under the pressure of gravitational anomalies that could turn them into cosmic confetti with a gentle nudge. Well, isn't this just charming, Harv said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he strapped himself in beside Mirov. It's like the universe decided to throw a tantrum and we got front row seats. More like we got shoved into the middle of a mosh pit, Juno replied, her fingers dancing over the holographic display with practiced ease, and the band's playing Smash the Humans. Let's just hope we can leave before they get to the encore, Mirov muttered, eyes glued to the sensors. Outside, the space around them was a swirling mess of asteroid fragments and electromagnetic interference. It was the kind of place mothers warned their ships about, not that anyone sane would come here willingly, except maybe a masochist with a death wish. Or, a desperate captain and his battered crew trying to save the universe from self-implosion. Same difference. As they zigzagged through the maelstrom, Mirov's attention was yanked to the comm panel as an incoming transmission crackled to life. It wasn't friendly. The voice on the other end was as warm and inviting as a tax collector on a rainy day. This is Commander Rigg of the Vortex Alliance. You are trespassing in restricted space. Power down and prepare for boarding. Mirov snorted, exchanging a look with Harv. Great, just what we needed, unwelcome guests. Should we roll out the red carpet or just blow them a kiss? Juno asked, not looking up from her console. Neither, Mirov decided. Harv, prepare for evasive maneuvers. Juno, see if you can jam their sensors. Let's make them work for their money. The Vortex Alliance ships appeared on the screen, sleek and menacing. They were the kind of vessels that screamed we take no prisoners, and they probably meant it. Looks like they've brought the whole family, Harv noted grimly as more blips appeared on the radar. How thoughtful. They must really want to ruin our day, Juno added, trying to match their sarcasm with a flicker of grim humor. Hope they're ready for disappointment. The last hope banked sharply to the right, engines protesting with the strain. The Vortex ships followed, their weapons hot on their tail like an overzealous mother-in-law. Mirov gripped the control panel, his mind racing. Harv, get down to the engine room and see if you can squeeze some extra juice out of the old girl, Mirov ordered. We're going to need every ounce of power she's got. Harv nodded, unbuckling himself. On it. If I don't come back, remember me as I was, perpetually sarcastic and begrudgingly heroic. Mirov half smiled at his retreating back, then turned his focus back to the unfolding mess. The Vortex ships were gaining, and with every evasive maneuver, the last hope creaked a little louder, as if reminding them that miracles came at a price. Juno's voice cut through the tension. "Captain, I've managed to scramble their targeting systems for a bit. Should buy us some time." "Good work," Mirov replied, glancing at her with gratitude. "Just keep us from getting vaporized until Harv works his magic." The ship shuddered violently as a near miss rocked them, and Mirov couldn't help but feel like a mouse in a very angry cat's playground. But they'd been in tight spots before. They always managed to scrape through, usually with little more than spit, duct tape, and sheer bloody-mindedness. As the ship zigzagged through the madness, Mirov's thoughts turned to the mission. The critical evidence they sought lay at the heart of this chaos. If they didn't get it, all their efforts would be as meaningless as a politician's promise. "Juno, gather a team and prepare for the mission," Mirov ordered, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. "It's time we got what we came for." Juno nodded, her expression determined. "On it, Captain, let's see if we can't snatch victory from the jaws of certain death." Leaving the bridge in capable hands, Mirov joined Juno as she assembled a small team. Each member was handpicked for their skills and, more importantly, their willingness to see the mission through, regardless of the cost. "All right, team," Juno said, addressing them with her trademark sharpness. "We've got a job to do, and it's not for the faint of heart. We're heading into the heart of the gauntlet to retrieve the evidence that'll save our collective butts." "Questions?" One of the crew, a wiry woman with a perpetual scowl, raised her hand. "What's the retirement plan like?" Juno smirked. "Don't die and you might live long enough to find out." With that, the team suited up, each donning their gear with the grim efficiency of soldiers who'd seen one too many last stands. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and they stepped into the void, thrusters engaging as they maneuvered towards the coordinates. "Dibs on not being the hero," one of the crew muttered over the comms, breaking the tense silence. "Too late," Juno replied. "We're all heroes today, whether we like it or not." The team moved through the wreckage-strewn expanse, the debris field acting like a cosmic obstacle course designed by someone with a twisted sense of humor. Juno led the way, her focus unyielding as they closed in on their target. "Keep your eyes peeled," Juno warned. "I doubt we're the only ones interested in this little treasure." They arrived at the designated coordinates, finding the location eerily quiet. Too quiet, like the calm before a particularly nasty storm. The evidence they sought was housed within a derelict station, a relic from some forgotten war, its once-proud structure now a ghostly husk floating in the void. Inside, the corridors were dark and foreboding, the faint hum of long-dormant systems echoing through the empty halls. Juno led the team deeper, their steps cautious as they approached the central data core. "All right, this is it," Juno said, pointing to the terminal. "Get that data and let's get the hell out of here." One of the techs stepped forward, fingers dancing over the keypad with practiced precision. The process was painfully slow, each second stretching into eternity, but eventually the data transfer began. "Almost there," the tech announced, their voice tight with concentration. "Just a little longer." Juno kept watch, her senses on high alert. It was never this easy. Something was bound to go wrong, and she'd be damned if she let it catch them unprepared. Sure enough, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor, the heavy clunk of boots unmistakable. "Looks like we've got company," Juno said, her voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. "Everyone get ready." The team took cover, weapons drawn as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The footsteps grew louder, and soon the first of their pursuers appeared, armored figures with blasters drawn. "Well, well," Juno called out, her tone mocking. "Looks like you took a wrong turn somewhere. We could say the same for you," one of the figures replied, their face obscured by a visor. "Hand over the data and we might let you walk away." "You know, I've heard better deals from a used speeder salesman," Juno retorted. "No thanks." The ensuing firefight was a chaotic dance of blaster fire and shouted commands, the narrow corridor turning into a war zone. Juno and her team fought with the desperation of those who knew there was no backup coming. "We need to finish this up," the tech shouted, their voice barely audible over the din. "Can't hold them off forever." Juno grit her teeth, focusing on keeping the enemy at bay. There was no room for doubt, no space for second thoughts. Just survival, plain and simple. Finally, the tech called out, "Got it, data's secure. Time to go," Juno ordered, pulling back as her team laid down cover fire. They retreated through the station, the sounds of pursuit hot on their heels. They reached the airlock, sealing it behind them with a satisfying hiss. As they launched themselves back towards the last hope, Juno couldn't help but feel a grim sense of satisfaction. They'd done it. Against the odds, they'd done it. "Captain," Juno reported once they were safely back aboard, her voice filled with adrenaline and relief. "We've got the evidence." "Good work," Mirov replied, his voice steady with approval. "Now let's get the hell out of here." The last hope broke away from the chaos, engines flaring as they sped back towards the fleet. The evidence was secure, but the journey was far from over. They still had to face the interstellar court and somehow convince it to rule in their favor. No small feat, considering their history of being less than subtle, but for now, they'd take the victory. In a universe that seemed determined to chew them up and spit them out, they'd pulled off a miracle, and in the spirit of gallows humor, Mirov couldn't resist a final quip. "Guess we can add evidence retrieval to our resumes," he said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah," Juno replied, her own smile matching his. "Let's just hope we don't have to explain how we got it." In the grim darkness of space, where hope was scarce and luck even scarcer, the crew of the Last Hope had done the impossible, and for now, that was enough. As the Last Hope skimmed out of the gauntlet, creaking ominously like a rusty door, you could almost hear the collective sigh of relief over the ship's intercom. It was the kind of sigh that said, "Hey, we're not dead yet," which, considering the odds, was practically cause for celebration. Captain Arlen Mirov leaned back in his seat, wiping away the thin sheen of sweat that had gathered on his forehead. He glanced sideways at Lieutenant Harv, who had returned from the engine room looking like he'd wrestled with a particularly angry plasma conduit, and lost. "Glad you could join us," Mirov said with a smirk. "How's the old girl holding up?" Harv gave a noncommittal shrug. "I don't want to say she's on her last leg, but let's just say if she were an Earth car, she'd be eligible for classic plates." He plopped into his seat, the picture of begrudging heroism. Junoka was already at her station, her fingers dancing over the holographic interface with precision. "Hey, at least we're in one piece," she called out, her tone laced with grim humor. "Though one more skirmish like that, and we might start shedding pieces like an overripe fruit." The ship's intercom crackled to life, the voice of the Earth diplomat coming through strained and weary. "Captain Mirov, do you have the evidence?" Mirov looked at Juno, who nodded, holding up the data drive like it was the Holy Grail. "Affirmative," Mirov replied, "though convincing the interstellar court is going to be about as easy as teaching a cat to fetch." "Let's hope they are in a fetching mood," the diplomat responded, not sounding particularly hopeful. As the Last Hope approached the fleet, the grim reality of their situation came into view. Ships drifted in varying states of ruin, hulls breached, systems flickering like dying stars. If the fleet had been a buffet, it looked like the Vortex Alliance had taken a particularly vicious bite out of it. "Well, isn't that a sight for sore eyes?" Harv murmured, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And to think I was worried today would be boring," Juno grimaced. "Morale's probably lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut." "We need a win here, Mirov." "Yeah, well, let's see if the court's in the mood for justice," Mirov muttered, plotting a course for the interstellar court's holographic meeting room, where the galaxy's most self-important gather to pretend they cared about justice. The interstellar court was not the majestic courtroom you'd expect from its grandiose name. It was more like a virtual pit stop for intergalactic bickering. Still, it was the only game in town, and they'd have to play by its rules, however twisted they might be. The court's holographic screen flickered to life, the pixelated visage of the chief arbiter looming over them like a disapproving schoolteacher. He peered down at Mirov and Juno with the kind of expression usually reserved for wayward children and particularly bad artworks. "Captain Mirov, I understand you have evidence pertaining to the Vortex Alliance's recent activities," the arbiter intoned, his voice as dry as a Martian dust storm. "That's right," Mirov replied, his voice laced with equal parts defiance and desperation. "This data proves the Vortex Alliance tampered with our navigation systems and attacked us without provocation. Allegations are one thing, Captain. Proof is another," the arbiter replied, not budging an inch. Juno took a step forward, her voice steady, her eyes narrowing with determination. "With all due respect, Arbiter, this isn't just about us. If the Alliance gets away with this, no one in this galaxy is safe." The Arbiter leaned back, a practiced gesture of consideration that Mirov suspected was more for show than anything. "Very well. Present your evidence." Juno inserted the data drive into the court's holographic interface, and the data began to play, a damning sequence of intercepted transmissions, tampered navigational logs, and orders straight from the Vortex Alliance's high command. As the evidence unfolded, a ripple of murmurs spread through the representatives gathered in the virtual space, some of them visibly shifting in their seats. Mirov watched them with a kind of grim satisfaction. If this didn't rattle their cages, nothing would. "Well, I'll be," Harv muttered. "Looks like we might just have their attention." The arbiter's expression shifted, the first crack in his stony facade. "This is compelling, Captain, but it will take more than just this to sway the court." Juno clenched her fists, frustration simmering beneath the surface. "What more do you need?" "Blood samples, a handwritten confession, perhaps a little less sarcasm and a touch more patience, MS," the arbiter suggested, his tone icy. "Patience isn't exactly a luxury we can afford, Arbiter," Mirov interjected. "The fleet's hanging on by a thread, and the Vortex Alliance is the one holding the scissors." The arbiter's gaze softened ever so slightly. "The court will deliberate on this matter. But understand, decisions here are not made lightly." The consequences of a ruling against the Vortex Alliance are considerable. Consequences or not, justice shouldn't be optional, Mirov replied, his voice laden with conviction. There was a beat of silence, tense and pregnant with possibility. Then, much to everyone's surprise, a representative from the Centauri delegation spoke up. I agree with Captain Mirov, the Centauri said, their voice firm and unwavering. The evidence is clear. We cannot allow the Vortex Alliance to act with impunity. Juno shot Mirov a glance that said, well, would you look at that? Maybe, just maybe, their luck was turning. Another representative, this one from the Andromeda Consortium, chimed in. The Centauri are right. If we don't act now, we may not get another chance. As the support began to swell, a small, hopeful flame flickered in Mirov's chest, threatening to melt the ice that had formed around his heart after years of fighting impossible battles. Looks like we've started a trend, Harv said wryly, leaning back as if they were discussing the weather and not the fate of their fleet. The Arbiter raised a hand, calling for order amidst the growing clamor. Very well, the court will reconvene to further discuss this evidence. Be assured, Captain Mirov, your concerns are not without merit. It was as close to a promise as Mirov was likely to get. He nodded, grateful despite his cynicism. Thank you, Arbiter. That's all we ask. As the holographic session ended, Juno turned to Mirov, her expression a mix of relief and astonishment. Did we just do that? Mirov chuckled, the sound more of a dry rasp than genuine amusement. Looks like it. Who knew a bunch of self-important bureaucrats could be moved by something as trivial as the truth? Harv slapped him on the back, a rare show of camaraderie. Give yourself some credit, you're more persuasive than you look. Well, let's not break out the champagne just yet, Mirov cautioned. We've got them talking, but we're not out of the woods, not by a long shot. Juno nodded, her resolve undiminished. But it's a start, and right now I'll take a start over nothing. As the last hope drifted back to join the beleaguered fleet, Mirov allowed himself a small smile. For the first time in a long while, things were looking up. They'd drawn a line in the cosmic sand, and for better or worse, people were starting to notice. In the grimdark expanse of space, where hope was a rare commodity and survival was never guaranteed, the crew of the Last Hope had thrown their hat in the ring. Against all odds, they had the beginnings of something that could turn the tide. Well, Captain, Juno said, her tone light but laced with the weight of their shared burden. Ready for the next round, Mirov nodded, his gaze fixed on the stars. Let's give him hell. And with that, the Last Hope powered forward, battered but unbowed, ready to face whatever new horrors the galaxy decided to throw their way, because that's what they did. They bucked the odds, laughed in the face of certain doom, and kept on flying. And so long as there was breath in their lungs and fire in their hearts, they'd keep doing it, because in the end, what else was there? In a universe gone mad, sometimes the only thing you could do was keep the faith, hold the line, and hope for the best. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The Last Hope limped back into formation with the refugee fleet, a misfit parade of battered ships that looked like they'd been through the cosmic equivalent of a bar brawl and lost. Captain Arlen Mirov stood at the helm, his eyes locked on the holographic display, as if he could will the situation to improve just by glaring at it hard enough. Well, Captain, said Lieutenant Harv, his voice dripping with sarcasm, it seems we've been upgraded from completely screwed to mildly hosed. Progress, I suppose. Mirov grunted, a noncommittal sound that was just short of optimistic. Yeah, well, let's see if we can manage not dead by lunch. The fleet was a ragtag collection of vessels, ranging from sleek transporters that had seen better days to cargo ships that looked like they'd been cobbled together from spare parts and stubbornness. All of them were gathered in a loose formation, like a pack of wounded animals huddling together for warmth. Junoka was at her station, her fingers flying over the holographic interface with the kind of precision that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else, but she'd make the best of the hellhole she found herself in. I'm feeding the data from the court session to the rest of the fleet, she reported. Maybe seeing that we've got some allies will put a little spine in them, or they'll see it and decide we're just dragging them down into the abyss with us, Mirov replied, crossing his arms over his chest. Nothing like a little doomsday to motivate a crowd, Harv added, settling into his seat with a resigned sigh. The intercom buzzed, the Earth diplomat's voice crackling through the static. Captain Mirov, Earth Command is requesting an update. They're, concerned about the superweapon. Concerned? Mirov snorted. That's one way to put it. Harv leaned over, whispering as if the universe itself might be eavesdropping. Concerned that we might actually pull this off, or concerned that we're about to add obliterated to our list of achievements, Mirov smirked. I'll take column A and a side of column B. Juno glanced over her shoulder. The fleet's not in any shape for a prolonged fight, Captain. We need a real solution, not just another desperate scramble. Yeah, well, that's what we're working on, Mirov replied, his eyes narrowing at the strategic display. We play our cards right, we might just live to see tomorrow. The holographic screen flickered to life again, this time with Commander Rig of the Vortex Alliance, looking as smug as a cat in a creamery. His voice was smooth yet dangerously slick, like oil on ice. Captain Mirov, it's come to our attention that your fleet is trespassing in restricted space. Stand down and prepare to be boarded. Mirov rolled his eyes, addressing the commander with all the enthusiasm one reserves for tax audits. Commander Rig, we've already been through this. You lot started this mess, and you can bet we're not going down without a fight. Rig's expression hardened, the mask slipping just enough to show the steel beneath. Your defiance will be your undoing, Captain. Mirov shrugged, a casual gesture that belied the tension crackling in the air. Wouldn't be the first time I've heard that. The screen went dark, leaving the crew in the uneasy silence that follows thinly veiled threats. Harv broke the quiet, a sardonic grin on his face. Charming fellow, isn't he? Bet he's a hit at parties. Juno sighed, her fingers busy plotting potential escape routes. All right, Captain. If we're doing this, we'd better be ready to throw everything we've got at them. No point in holding back now. Mirov nodded, the weight of command settling on his shoulders like an unwanted coat. Prepare the fleet. If they want to fight, we'll give them one they won't forget. As the last hope maneuvered into position, the rest of the fleet followed suit, ships aligning in a ragged line of defiance. It was a pathetic sight, if truth be told, but there was something admirable about their refusal to roll over and die quietly. The Vortex Alliance fleet approached, sleek and deadly, their ships a stark contrast to the ramshackle armada of refugees. It was like watching a wolf descend on a flock of battered sheep, but these sheep had a few surprises left in them. Here they come, Harv muttered, his eyes glued to the tactical display. Mirov's heart pounded, a rhythmic drumbeat that matched the countdown ticking away on the screen. Hold steady. Wait for it, the two fleets clashed in a chaotic ballet of light and destruction. The refugee ships fired everything they had, a desperate storm of energy that lit up the void. The Vortex Alliance responded with surgical precision, their weapons slicing through the defenders with ruthless efficiency. Juno worked the holographic interface like a maestro, directing traffic and coordinating strikes. We've got a hole in their formation, Captain. Now's our chance. Mirov seized the opportunity, barking orders to the fleet. All ships punch through. We break their line, we stand a chance. The last hope surged forward, leading the charge as the refugee fleet pressed the attack. The battered ships fought with the ferocity of the damned, each one a testament to the stubbornness of those who refused to go quietly. It was chaos, but in that chaos there was a glimmer of hope. The Vortex Alliance, so accustomed to crushing opposition with ease, was thrown off balance by the ferocity of the attack. Keep pushing, Mirov shouted, his voice rising above the cacophony. Don't let them regroup. The Earth diplomat's voice crackled over the intercom, urgent and tinged with hope. Captain, the Interstellar Court has made a ruling. They've ordered the deactivation of the superweapon. Juno's eyes widened, and for a moment she allowed herself a grin. Looks like the bureaucrats came through for us after all. Mirov couldn't help but chuckle, a sound that was equal parts relief and disbelief. Well, I'll be damned. Maybe there's hope for the galaxy yet. As the Vortex Alliance ships began to retreat, the battered refugee fleet let out a collective breath. They had done the impossible, survived the unsurvivable, and lived to see another day. Mirov glanced at his crew, their faces a mix of exhaustion and triumph. We did it, he said, the words carrying the weight of the universe. Harv clapped him on the back, grinning like a madman. Against all odds, Captain, hell of a thing. Juno nodded, her eyes still glued to the holographic interface. We're not out of the woods yet, but it's a start. The fleet regrouped, licking their wounds and assessing the damage. The last hope was worse for wear, but still flying, a testament to the resilience of its crew and the stubborn refusal to go quietly into the night. As the stars began to shift overhead, the fleet moved forward, a ragged band of survivors united by the shared experience of staring death in the face and laughing. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and for now, that was enough. In the end, it wasn't the power of the ships or the might of the weapons that had won the day, but the indomitable spirit of those who refused to give up. In a universe gone mad, sometimes the only thing you could do was stand your ground, hold the line, and hope for the best. And as the last hope led the fleet onward, Mirov couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long while, things were looking up. They'd faced the darkness and lived to tell the tale, and as far as he was concerned, that was a victory worth celebrating. Ready for the next round? Juno asked, her voice tinged with the same determination that had carried them through the battle. Mirov nodded, his gaze fixed on the stars. Let's give him hell. And with that, the last hope powered forward, battered but unbowed, ready to face whatever new horrors the galaxy decided to throw their way, because that's what they did. They bucked the odds, laughed in the face of certain doom, and kept on flying. And so long as there was breath in their lungs and fire in their hearts, they'd keep doing it, because in the end, what else was there? The last hope limped through space like a drunk stumbling home after last call, but there was a certain dignity to its defiance. Captain Arlen Mirov stood at the helm, his posture as straight as the rickety ship allowed, eyes fixed on the stars as if he was daring the universe to throw another tantrum. Beside him, Lieutenant Harv looked like he'd just come from his own funeral, but his eyes glinted with sardonic life. "Well, Mirov," Harv said, voice as dry as a Martian dust storm, "seems we survived the great cosmic blender without ending up as a smear on some asteroid. I'd call that a win, wouldn't you?" Mirov snorted, a sound that was more acknowledgement than agreement. "Yes, well, the jury's still out on whether we're better off alive or not." Harv leaned back, his chair creaking ominously. "With our kind of luck, I'd wager we'll get the verdict when it's too late to matter." A flicker from the holographic interface caught Mirov's attention. Junoka was still hunched over her station, orchestrating the fleet's movements with the grim determination of a conductor leading an orchestra of rusty instruments. "Hey, Juno," Mirov called, "what's the situation with the fleet? Still holding together, or should I start drafting our eulogy?" Juno glanced up, offering a tired but genuine smile. "Holding, Captain. Against all odds, we've managed to not disintegrate. The other ships are sticking with us for now. Looks like our little stunt put some spine in them." Mirov nodded. "Good, last thing we need is for everyone to start thinking for themselves." The intercom crackled to life, the Earth diplomat's voice carrying an uncharacteristic note of relief. "Captain Mirov, I've got Earth Command on the line. They're appreciative of your efforts and want to discuss a more permanent arrangement." "Appreciative," Harv echoed, eyebrows climbing toward his hairline. "That's diplomatic, for we're not going to shoot you on sight, right?" Mirov shrugged, adjusting the collar of his uniform. "I'll take whatever peace offering they're throwing our way." "Beats facing another Vortex welcome party." The diplomat continued. "They're proposing a summit, Captain. They want to formalize an alliance with the fleet." Mirov paused, his heart skipping a beat. "An alliance with us? Seems you made quite the impression," the diplomat replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Even managed to impress the interstellar court. They've put out an official commendation for your actions." Juno chuckled, a sound that was equal parts disbelief and satisfaction. "Imagine that. Not every day you get a standing ovation from the universe's most constipated bureaucrats." "Don't get too excited," Harv warned, a playful glint in his eye. "Next thing you know, they'll be asking us to solve all their problems. And I don't know about you, but I'm not ready to trade my blaster for a gavel." Mirov waved a hand. "We'll cross that black hole when we come to it. Right now, let's focus on what we've got. Juno, patch us through to the fleet. Time for a pep talk." Juno nodded, her fingers dancing over the holographic controls. Moments later, the faces of the fleet's captains appeared, a motley crew that looked like they'd been assembled from the universe's lost and found. Mirov took a breath, hoping his voice carried the conviction he didn't entirely feel. "Everyone," he began, "we've been through the grinder and come out the other side. Thanks to your courage and a healthy dose of luck, we've managed to push back the Vortex Alliance and keep Earth safe." Cheers and whoops erupted from the screens, a sound more ragged than triumphant, but laced with a sincerity that warmed Mirov's tired heart. "We're not out of the woods yet," he continued, "but Earth Command is reaching out. They want to work with us, formalize an alliance. They see what I've seen all along, that there's strength in our ragtag band of misfits." One of the captains, a grizzled veteran with a cybernetic arm, raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly do they want from us, Captain? More than just cannon fodder, I hope." Mirov chuckled. "Hell, they'd be idiots not to. You may look like a junkyard, but we've got more guts than a butcher's shop on a busy day." Laughter rippled through the connections, a shared moment of levity that was more potent than any speech could ever be. "Let's keep doing what we do best," Mirov said. "Survive, adapt, and be a pain in the ass to anyone who underestimates us." As the connection cut off, Harv leaned over, pretending to wipe a tear from his eye. "Beautiful Captain, if I didn't know you better, I'd think you were actually trying." Juno snorted, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. Motivation through sarcasm. "Never thought I'd see the day." Mirov grinned, his spirits buoyed by the banter. "Stick around, Juno, and you'll see more miracles than you'd believe." As the fleet moved through the dark expanse of space, a new sense of purpose infused the battered vessels. They weren't just running anymore, they were part of something bigger. And for the first time since the chaos began, there was an end in sight that didn't involve a fiery demise or an unmarked grave in the void. Earth Command's proposal came through in short order, a formal request for a summit to discuss terms. Mirov reviewed the transmission, a mix of excitement and anxiety churning in his gut. If they could pull this off, they'd secure not just their survival, but a chance to rebuild, to look forward instead of over their shoulders. Juno's voice broke through his thoughts. "Any word from Commander Rigg? I'd hate to think he's licking his wounds in peace." Mirov chuckled. "Nothing yet, but I doubt we've seen the last of him. Guys like Rigg have a way of sticking around like a bad rash." Harv, ever the cynic, nodded sagely. "And just like a rash, he'll show up again when we least expect it." As the last hope continued its journey, the crew settled into a routine, patching up the ship and preparing for the summit. Mirov found himself spending more time in the command center, reviewing reports and preparing for negotiations. It was a welcome change from dodging plasma bolts and praying their engines wouldn't explode. The day of the summit arrived with little fanfare, the fleet rendezvousing with an Earth delegation at a neutral station orbiting a minor planet. The last hope docked with the grace of a drunken elephant, but nobody seemed to mind. Mirov and his core team, including Harv and Juno, made their way through the station's sterile corridors, a stark contrast to the battle-scarred halls of their ship. A tall, impeccably dressed diplomat greeted them, his smile as polished as his shoes. "Captain Mirov, an honor to meet you. I'm Ambassador Callan." Mirov returned the smile, his handshake firm but not overbearing. "Ambassador, good to put a face to the voice. Hope the digs are to your liking." Callan chuckled, leading them to a conference room. "It's rare to meet someone who's both a hero and modest." "Let's get started, shall we?" The discussions were long but surprisingly amicable, the Earth delegation eager to capitalize on the fleet's resilience and resourcefulness. They hammered out the details with the precision of a laser scalpel, crafting an agreement that promised mutual support and defense. Juno, who'd been silent for most of the talks, finally spoke up. "And what about the Vortex Alliance?" "They're not going to be pleased about this little love fest." Callan nodded, acknowledging the concern. "We're aware, but with your help, we can bolster our defenses and send a clear message that we won't be bullied into submission." Mirov leaned back, satisfied, "And we get the supplies and support we need to keep our ships flying." A win-win. As the meeting concluded, Mirov couldn't help but feel a weight lifting from his shoulders. They'd done it, secured a future that didn't involve constant running and hiding. Back on the last hope, the mood was almost celebratory. Harv and Juno joined Mirov on the bridge, the three of them sharing a moment of quiet camaraderie. "Who would have thought," Harv mused, "that we'd go from space hobos to galactic heroes?" Juno snorted, crossing her arms. "I wouldn't start polishing your halo just yet, Harv. We've still got a long road ahead." Mirov nodded, his gaze fixed on the view beyond the viewport. "True, but for once we've got a fighting chance. And that's worth celebrating." The stars stretched out before them, a vast canvas of possibilities. The last hope might have been a battered ship with a questionable reputation, but it had heart and the tenacity to match. And as long as they kept that fire burning, there was no telling how far they could go. As the fleet moved forward, united by new alliances and a shared purpose, Captain Mirov allowed himself a rare moment of optimism. They defied the odds, turned the tables, and proved that sometimes the best way to survive was simply to refuse to die. "Ready for whatever comes next?" Juno asked, her voice tinged with anticipation. Mirov grinned, a fire in his eyes. "Absolutely. Let's show the galaxy what makes humanity truly unstoppable." And with that, the last hope powered forward, leading the charge into an uncertain but promising future. Because in the end, even in the darkest corners of space, hope was the most powerful weapon of all.